Nice that you are here. We do a lot of events. We try to make them fun. We're trying to have a positive conversation. That's always the idea. There's a lot of dooms conversations we can have about tech in general. We try to make it fun. We try to laugh a lot. We try to keep it in English so that it's open for everyone. If something is not clear, I can translate almost into Dutch, in German, not French, but that's it. Can't translate anymore. For the rest, there is AI, right? We record always the first part, but you won't be recorded. Neither will you be heard because the microphone is here. We have to do that because we need a lot of content as a non-profit organization. To give you a bit of context who we are very briefly, we used to be called, or we have an organization that's called the Sustainable Digital Infrastructure Alliance, which is really about addressing the environmental impact of data centers. We have, since this year, created a new think tank. That's this little logo here and this one, called Leitmotiv, which is essentially the question of, as a society, we have certain values. We want sustainability maybe, fairness, competitiveness, innovation, whatever that value may be. And the question is, a lot of policymakers struggle to operationalize those, meaning to create laws, policies, to actually get that done for us as a society. So a lot of our work focuses also on educating policymakers, and I use some of the tools that we use for our thinking in the presentation as well. Today is about AI, and I can honestly say that I don't like talking about it. Because it is yet another technology that we give a lot of attention to. Maybe you remember there was something called the blockchain. Remember that? That feels like it was just yesterday, same hype, same conversations. And we never talk about the actual foundational economics, the business models, the incentives. And we always just jump at the next thing. And when I say we, I mean we as a society, because we prefer to talk about opportunity rather than doing the hard work, right? And before it was blockchain, already Germany, for example, always said, we want to digitalize. And for that, there is a massive knowledge gap, especially in Germany, of people not knowing how to do that. And now we're just shouting, use AI! It still doesn't close the knowledge gap, you know? And I would prefer to have those macro and systemic conversations, but I think it's also useful sometimes to talk about the products. So today is a little bit an AI spin, but you will see that most of these things you can just replace the word AI with digital product, and it's pretty applicable to every digital product. Now, I try to be, the presentation is supposed to be an hour. I don't think I can talk that long. If you make me with questions, I can. But I relatively quickly want to get to just a discussion around incentives, around is environmental impact a problem? Fun fact, I think I invited 200 of my friends in Berlin. I am from Berlin. I am from Startup Land. I have gotten at least 80 responses that they said environmental impact doesn't matter right now. So that is already like a statistic that's probably, in this context, probably useful. But I think it should matter, and I will give you reasons why. Good. Any questions on this so far? So they care about time to market. Then you say, but what about the resource cost? So you need a lot of compute, right? And they're like, no, I get that for free. Right? Yeah, because most of Google, Amazon, Microsoft, they have gigantic programs now where they hand out €500,000 worth of free compute. So everybody is just building. And the focus is, how fast can I build and get something to market and get customers? Because at the end of the day, there will be maybe 100, maybe 1,000 AI applications that make it, but and everybody wants to be first. But I'll cover a bit of that. Good. Yeah, this is me. Former software engineer, have 2 children. I worked in the US for a long time. I worked in the UK for a long time. I've been doing startups my whole life, but 6 years ago I stopped, mostly because I was disappointed with what I was doing. Like I really wanted to make the world a better place, as everybody does in Silicon Valley, but I realized that building software in the US really was more about creating monopolies and making some people very rich, and that was not me. So here I am back in Europe. Okay. Can you see it well? Because is the screen okay? Yeah? Okay. This is, Eric knows this already. This is my favorite picture. And mostly if there's technical people here, they're always like, Max, you're oversimplifying it. Yes, I am. So you see 3 blocks here. This one is the virtual block, so everything that's orange. This does not exist. If you unplug your computer, it's all gone. If you unplug the data centers, all this is gone. There's something that is very important. It's a global marketplace called the internet, through which we can openly trade whatever we want. There's essentially no borders, no import restrictions. You know, if I sell my product from here to the US, there is no, through the internet, there is no limitation. And on the bottom part is the physical side. So to use our example of today with AI, so one important distinction to begin with is you have a product like ChatGPT, but that's not a technology. The technology is GPT, the actual model, that is the tech. The business model for most people is free because you can just go and use it, right? We'll talk about that in a moment. And the resource cost, so compute is the favorite proxy, but resources are also storage and network capacity, is about 4x compared to any other digital product. So if you do a Google search, at the very least, GPT is 4x more resource intensive. That's a number that's not written down, but there's a panel where Google said this out loud. They said, if we put an LLM into our search, it raises the cost per query about 4x. Right? So economically speaking, that should already make this technology not so attractive because it's very resource intensive. When we talk about environmental impact, that happens down here. So a lot of people talk about data centers. We talk about digital infrastructure because it's a data center with servers and GPUs inside. So it's equipment, network equipment, buildings. That's where the environmental impact is created. Up here, of course, you can do something with the product that's damaging to the environment, but fundamentally, it's here. And as a society, we give inputs. So we give energy, we give land, we give natural resources, and we give that to the bottom part here. Those are the inputs. Now, LLMs are great, right? So from a purely scientific and technical perspective, they're a massive innovation. It's completely acknowledgeable. If we use that to cure cancer, fantastic, right? If we use it to make photos of ourselves and turn them into anime, maybe a little bit tricky proposition, right? So it's really about what we do with this technology. All technology is neither good or bad. It's always what we do with it. And there we need to take some choices. That's also why I like to talk about values, because values help us decide. Now, for the economist, so I said before, so the resource cost is 4x higher, right? So if I have a car, lots of cars in Germany, and I price the gasoline, so the resource that I need to drive that car at €1 per liter, then I get a lot of people that go like, let's just quickly drive to the supermarket, right? Let's just do that. Or let's go on holidays with the car. So the cost of the resource defines the application space, right? So if this completely made up numbers, if I make gasoline 50 euros per liter, right, then probably people will be like, let's go on holiday by train. Huh? Or do we actually need a car? So resource supply and the cost of supply usually dictates what I do with a technology. Right? Now, let's take that to LLMs. So in an LLM, you have the resource cost compute, which is free. I will explain you how that works. In most cases, it's almost free. LLMs now also exist as open source technology, so you could argue that it's either very low cost or also free. So the application space is infinite. And you see that every day. I mean, we are in this AI idea lab of the government, and there's like every corner here, there is some tech where somebody is like, oh, let's use this to detect bird noises, right? And it's also overwhelming if you're trying to create a startup because like purely economically, everything is possible. There's no constraint on, oh, this is so expensive, let's only use this for really good applications. And I made an example here. If this would cost 100 euros per compute unit and the LLMs would cost 1,000 euros per query, then everybody would be like, let's focus on really creating value with this thing, right? It would immediately change all of the ways we look at AI, and it would also slow down a lot the growth of this thing. Why is this all free? Because if you really look into the details, you see that basically digital resources are either directly or indirectly subsidized by corporations. So the most famous example of that is Microsoft investing in OpenAI, giving them billions of dollars, and now you would say, well, then they get the compute for free. No, actually, they just get a discount. So they still pay for the compute, but it's directly subsidized. There's no difference to the German state handing a company money to buy compute than Microsoft handing billions to a startup to buy compute. It is the same. It is a subsidy. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize, a lot of this is also subsidized through venture capital. So a VC giving a startup €1 billion to spend on cloud computing to build AI or to apply AI. Usually these venture capital funds are backed by pension funds. So it's your money, right? So they're subsidizing these startups through our money. And of course, there's some announcements floating around on how many billions the EU is about to spend on essentially creating AI factories, which is just another way of saying we're going to subsidize the shit out of this. We're going to flood Europe with free computation, and we're going to make that equation, break that equation of normal economics. On the LLM side, it's the same. So the technology development, but also the application, or actually, I forgot one example. That one is really funny. Microsoft uses CoreWeaver for the GPU infrastructure for their cloud, and CoreWeaver's biggest investor is NVIDIA. And guess who NVIDIA's biggest customer is for GPUs? Also CoreWeaver. So they're basically putting money into a company that then buys stuff from them, which in my mind is a bit like, how is this even legal? But that's a different, but they're all doing this to essentially insert enough subsidies to reduce the cost of these two things to almost nothing. And on the last side is then when you build a product with LLMs and indirectly with digital resources, of course, there's also, again, venture capital basically subsidizing the initial investment cost. But most of that money, again, goes there. And when the state says we're going to invest, always remember it's our money, right? They're investing on our behalf. Good. Some examples of where you can really see this. This is the latest number, I think, that came out from their financial filings, is that the OpenAI in itself is already losing $5 billion a year. That's a lot of money, right? So essentially, it's a business that economically doesn't work, because if they can't offer it for free, I will explain you on the next slide, the whole idea of this won't work. So again, investors, especially venture capitalists, are basically subsidizing this part. Now, of course, they go to Trump and they're like, hey, we love state. We love state intervention. 2 years ago, it's like no state should get involved in tech. Now it's like, we need money. We need so much money. You don't believe it. So this has changed. And also, of course, now the cost of training is going up. That's another one. And this is the amount of venture capital that goes into AI startups, so the red part. So you see that basically the subsidies are ramping up to make this work, because fundamentally the economics don't really work. So all of a sudden, it makes sense to throw a bazooka at every email that you write, at every social media post you write, from an energy perspective, but also from a cost perspective, which under no normal economic system would that work. Right? It only works because it's subsidized. So why would you want to subsidize it? Well, the whole digital economy is built on rebound effects, or Jevons paradox. Who doesn't know what a rebound effect is? Good. So the idea, a rebound effect is something that seems very counterintuitive. If you make something more efficient, consumption rises. So more fuel-efficient cars, people drive them more, so the total fuel consumption goes up. That's why a lot of corporates love to talk about, or businesses love to talk about efficiency, but not sustainability, because efficiency always leads to more consumption, unless it's constrained by laws, for example. But, laws, nobody likes those. So this whole thing is built on a rebound effect, and that only works if you make it appear as if the resources are very efficient. How do you do that? By subsidizing them. So you make them appear zero cost, so then you get a lot of consumption. I think we can all agree that the consumption of AI, even though I don't have statistics on that, is through the roof, right? Everybody's using it, so it's perfect. And why is that great? Because then you have product makers and tech companies and startups going into every single sector of our society and saying, we can do this for healthcare, we can do this for industry, we can do this for cars. We need to put AI into every single thing, right? And once that's complete, you raise prices. Yeah? Because then the subsidies are over. Now the cost of the resources are rising. And what do you need to do? You need to recoup what you invested originally. But at that point, all of society is locked into your products and your technologies. And therefore, you raise prices. I just used Notion when they added AI, prices doubled. OpenAI, I'm sure you read this, they're already talking about charging $20,000 for an agent. So once everybody's hooked on this, once everybody's, we're not customers. Remember, in Silicon Valley, we are users. Same as with heroin, they're also users. We are users, and once we're hooked, you raise prices, and you can then phase out the subsidies. That's essentially what this whole game is about. Who benefits, right? That's the magic question. Who actually benefits from this? So if I'm a startup, I don't really benefit because I incur massive losses. If I'm a VC, I'm also not yet benefiting, and I won't for a really long time because I'm also essentially just losing money. Society doesn't benefit, at least for now, because all we do right now is invest massive amounts of land, energy, natural resources, everything we have, we are putting into this, or we are about to put into this. So we are also not really gaining anything. Also, especially a lot of these companies don't pay taxes here. So you could say our return on investment is limited. And the more LLMs are now being thrown into the market, mostly for free or by open source people, they also don't get paid for that, right? So they also don't participate in the value creation either. So who benefits? That's the question. Well, if I happen to be in the business of selling digital resources or compute, it's a good time. Because it doesn't really matter what you build with AI, it always uses compute. That's the one fundamental truth. And the companies that own these parts, the digital infrastructure part, and can generate compute and digital resources are the ones that, no matter what, benefit. Because all the subsidies that I mentioned, either state subsidies, corporate, or venture capital, are flowing essentially to pay for this. Because otherwise you don't get a rebound effect. So what are these companies doing? They're extracting billions, if not even trillions of euros from everybody plowing money in at the top and then taking it out at the bottom. And if your AI startup fails, it doesn't matter. You paid your AWS bill, so you're good from their perspective. So that's why I often refer to this as a heist. Because if we don't really think it through, then there's very few. Do I have to say which companies own the majority of this, more than 60%? They're called Google, Microsoft, and AWS. And this is where the money goes. And to NVIDIA, of course, but I think that's also obvious. So, like I said, if we create a rebound effect by subsidizing the resources to near zero cost, every industry, every sector will apply it and will implement it. Once every sector and industry is dependent on it, then we have perfect lock-in. And then you can't get rid of it anymore. And at that point, especially then, the infrastructure really prints money at scale. If you wonder, has this happened before? Yes. It's called the energy sector. Once in the US, when GE built the first power grid, the first thing they invented was a device called a microwave. Maybe you know it. And a fridge, pretty common now. And they said everybody needs a fridge. Yeah? Because it drove up electricity use, and they gave them away for free. Does it sound familiar? I don't know. Maybe the people in the US are actually reading the history books. But the only way we countered that was through regulation. Right? So we basically said there's a certain stuff that you can't do. Good. How to fix it? Because you're here for a project that we're doing where we're building tools. But I feel like without that narrative, I don't need to tell you about all the tech we're building. The easiest fix would be regulation, but let's say in the absence of it, what things can we do to help with this? And the first thing that we believe we should be doing is to have a true price for the digital resources. So to be able to say, let's take out all the subsidies, let's add all the environmental costs, all the resource costs on top, and say, this is what actually 1 unit of compute that goes into this LLM is actually costing. Because then companies can actually calculate what the real cost of it is, and hopefully then focus on use cases where they can extract equal value or create equal value. Interesting thing that This one was actually done by friends of ours in a consultancy in the Netherlands. It's in Dutch, but they calculated the entire cost of a terabyte of storage on a cloud platform, including the environmental costs. And you can see this is the actual price charged. This is the cost that society bears on top of it. And it turns out that it's about 450, 500 euros per terabyte. So it's not insane, but it's 4x, again, than what the providers are actually charging. Right? So it helps, and this is now used by a lot of governments in the Netherlands to rethink what data are we storing, why are we storing it, do we need to store it, because at that cost it becomes more painful. The other thing is transparency or visibility for customers, because everybody says, yeah, but people don't choose. People do choose. If you sit in an electric car today, everybody is very sensitive to the battery, so the first thing that every manufacturer does is they give you a little display that says, well, at your current driving style, you're going to run out of battery in 10 minutes. So you have an immediate feedback of, I do something, and this is how much resource cost I have, or this is how much environmental impact I have. Energy labels can also help, but I think this one is actually the most useful for changing the behavior of people while they're at the steering wheel. So this is a mental model that we use a lot for our work for NADIKI. What are the two outputs that come out of NADIKI, our project, is with our tool, you can create an environmental impact account for the entire life cycle of the model, both in its training and development. And what's new about that is that normally everybody measures real time only. So right now it's using 400 watts of power, but we built a system that you can compare it to bank accounts. So we collect all the environmental impact over the entire life, and we keep on adding it on top. So you can never get to zero, because once you buy a laptop, right, you start with something. This is your minimum viable environmental impact, and you can't reverse it. There's no way to get back to zero, but you can slow down how fast you're adding to it. So that's, if you really want to dive into that, we have a 40-page paper that explains in detail how that works. And you can also try it yourself if you're interested, but I think it's not so many technical people. But that's the first part. And the second part is the real-time piece. If you write a prompt, what you actually want immediately after you get the response is, if you want to know, was this a high-impact request with this much energy use? Was it a low-impact request with a lower energy use? Is that you also learn how to prompt in an environmentally friendly way. But you need that feedback, and right now you get none. You get, maybe it's slower or it takes longer, but you have no direct visibility. Think about the car again. Yeah? You push, you immediately see something spiking, and why can't this be the same way? Especially if everybody's already thinking about tokens, why then not also add the environmental impact dimension to that thinking? Yeah? That's what we need the real-time API for, and how we do that, that's also, we've done this many times, trying to measure shit. It's hard. And everybody usually ends up measuring just the server, because that's really convenient. What we have built is a system that looks at everything from the side, an observer, as it's called in software engineering. And we basically get real-time data from the data center, we get real-time data from the servers, we get real-time data from even partly from the application, and we compute that in real time and immediately give it back to the application. And it really contains every environmental impact down to the water that the data center uses, which is sometimes a big topic. And we have it all in one stream. And that's quite nice, I can tell you that. I also have screenshots of a demo if you want to see it. And we give that data back to whoever is building a digital product. If they want to measure in real time what the LLM is using, they can. It's totally possible. And it's all based on open source tools. It's not that we reinvented the wheel. The stuff is already out there. Yeah, and then this is not our dashboard. I just quickly took one because we don't have such a nice visualization yet. But at the end, if companies have a way to display the environmental impact of their products in a good way, I always say that information liquidity creates competitive markets. So what I mean by that, if everybody has to release this information, then you also have to start competing on it. So with our tooling, it's totally possible. Question is, why would people do it? Which is the last slide. 3 things that I also love to debate with you and get some more ideas. The first one that I always think about is if every single customer of every single digital product would just send an email or through the little support box and be like, hey guys, we need our environmental impact report. Could you please send it to us? If all those requests would come in within 1 week at OpenAI, trust me, they would think about getting that environmental impact report ready. Yeah? So we have power, so that's easy. Of course, it would be nice if there would be legislation or laws that force a product maker to also show the true resource cost that's underlying it. That would be nice to have. And the last one, there was already something in Europe like this, and now it's being reversed again, of course, is to simply say everybody who makes a digital product, especially if it has AI in it, needs to publish an environmental impact report. And ideally, not as a PDF with 400 pages, but just a nice dashboard with 4 numbers, 5 numbers that everybody can look at, because that fundamentally creates competition. Right? If every steel mill has to release their pollution data, trust me, there will be a conversation about how much pollution are we willing to take. Good. Are there any hardcore nerds here that want to talk about even deeper technical stuff, how it works? Okay, if you're only one, then I'll do it afterwards. Okay. Then I would stop here.